Welcome to today's webinar, GDPR and Privacy Post-Brexit. We're going to cover the GDPR regulations or GDPR and privacy regulations, and we'll talk a little bit post-Brexit, which is obviously a little bit unknown at this stage. A big thank you, in fact a huge thank you to ana.simpson of Writtle Group. She's IP and compliance lawyer, and she'll be taking us through the regulations in quite an extensive presentation. And then we've also got Kevin Derbyshire, so a big thank you to Kevin, who's head of services for Maglabs Digital, and Kevin will be talking about his experiences. He's going to introduce a bit of fun into GDPR, as you will see from his presentation. No pressure, Kevin. So I'll get started, and I'll try not to carry on too long. So I've been through the guest speakers. I'm going to move my screen a little bit, so bear with me. So I'm going to talk with, obviously the presentation today is about GDPR and marketing. We're not going to talk about the broader implications because GDPR is such an enormous topic. We will go through all our speakers and then we'll take questions afterwards. And if there is anything that we can't answer, we'll obviously be happy to email you afterwards where we can. Okay, so today's webinar will look at GDPR and privacy regulations and consider what they mean for marketers. Everything discussed on today's webinar focuses on how we, Maglabs, as a business, manages GDPR and privacy in order to be compliant. We're not offering advice. If you feel you need advice, then you will need to contact a lawyer because these are our experiences, our in-house lawyer, so we're not part of your business. So the Direct Marketing Association has provided guidance on GDPR and privacy for marketers. And it says that under the GDPR regulations, you need to have an appropriate legal ground to justify your marketing activity. And that marketers will need to be able to either use consent or legitimate interest to justify their marketing. So you can't just pick up the phone anymore. I mean, I'm not sure you ever really had the right to just pick up the phone and assume someone wanted to hear from you. But in theory, that happened an awful lot. And I know it still does a bit, but it's not, you wouldn't be compliant if you're doing that. For marketers, this means understanding and planning how you target your different market segments. So that's both your prospects and your customers. Tracking how you communicate with those prospects and customers, and ensuring they've given consent to receive a call or email. It also means keeping their personal information safe and not sharing it with a third party unless they've explicitly given you consent. So why is it so important? Why is GDPR so important? Why has it become so important? Such a big issue that we've heard about for years and years and discussed for so long. I think number one, the penalties are really severe if you're not compliant, and Anna's going to pick up on that a bit more, so I'm not going to go into any detail. It also impacts many, if not all, areas of business. Clearly, marketing is one area, but also finance, dealing with invoicing, and HR are clearly capturing, personal data. It also puts the consumer first and has introduced greater transparency. And then number four, it's changed the way marketers engage with prospects and customers, or it should have done. And I think in many ways it genuinely has. So my personal thoughts, and then I'll share some of what the industry has told us. Although it's introduced more process, and it absolutely has. Initially I felt there was a lot more to do. It's also presented us marketers with an opportunity to be more creative and engaging. We really have to make people want to engage with us, find innovative and new ways and different ways, because we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to capture the same people. So find different ways of getting people to agree to speak with us, engage with us, and ultimately do business with us. I think GDPR and privacy regulations also promote better data hygiene, better security and greater trust. And if we get it wrong, where marketing gets it wrong, the data breaches that we hear about all the time can be hugely damaging to a brand's reputation. You think about, you know, British Airways, some of the telephone companies, some of those data breaches where personal information of millions of customers was sent out or was hacked. It's very, very damaging, and those news stories tend to run for a long time. Okay, before I sign off and hand over to Anna, I'm just going to talk about what the industry has said. So Marketing Week, sort of a year and a half after the regulations came out, and you know, there's huge anticipation of how marketing would deal with all of this, said that it's not the monster it was made out to be. So apparently we're dealing with it better. The Direct Marketing Association said that 71% of marketers see GDPR as an opportunity. You know, generally we're quite a positive bunch, so so we're still looking for the positives in the negatives. And I think the other side of it is it's pushed data and managing data higher up the agenda for marketers. We have to think about it. There are regular audits in the business to check that we've got, you know, we're ticking all the boxes. And in some businesses, it's improved training, while in other businesses, it may also have improved collaboration. So how data is shared across businesses and the different parts of businesses. So they're my thoughts and some of the things that I've encountered. I'm going to hand over to Anna now to talk about the legalities of things. I'm going to also stop sharing so that Anna can share. Over to you, Anna.
Brilliant. Thank you, Justine. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you.
Now you can also correct anything that you don't agree with if you didn't agree with anything I said.
No, it was a brilliant introduction. I'm just going to build on it a little bit. So hopefully this is going to work for you. You can now see my screen.
Perfect.
Yeah, so brilliant introduction, Justine. It's exactly right what you've said so far about GDPR. What I am the general commercial in-house lawyer for Writtle Holdings, which is the parent company of Maglabs. So I've advised Maglabs and the other companies in our group on GDPR issues as part of my daily job. I'm not an overall GDPR specialist, but privacy and GDPR definitely comes into my job most weeks and most contracts we come across. So today what I'd like to talk about is the key principles of GDPR and data protection compliance, some of the challenges that businesses face, some frequently asked questions in the context of marketing specifically, and we'll touch a little bit on what will change or may change post-Brexit. So our first slide here says, why is data protection compliance important? And there's a lovely photo of Elizabeth Denham, who's the Information Commissioner. And to quote her, if your organisation can't demonstrate that good data protection is a cornerstone of your business practices, you're leaving your organisation open to enforcement action that can damage both public reputation and bank balance. So reputation is something that Justine touched upon, and it certainly is a big part of why you want your business to be compliant with all of the data protection rules. Here we go, it's a bit of a scary slide next. This is the enforcement action that the ICO could take. So there are 7 key principles of the GDPR. We'll go into those a little bit later, but failure to comply with those may leave you open to substantial fines. Article 83(5)(a) states that infringements of the basic principles for processing personal data are subject to the highest tier of administrative fines. So this is something that the ICO is taking very seriously. And fines could go up to 20 million euros or 4% of your business's total worldwide annual turnover, whichever is higher. So very scary numbers there for any business, especially in the current climate. The ICO has been taking enforcement action regularly since GDPR came into force in 2018. You can see examples of the fines on their websites, but in terms of marketing companies, just this year, some recent examples of ICO fines include a company being fined £130,000 in September for making more than 100,000 unauthorised direct marketing calls to people about their pension. And in March 2020, a marketing company was fined £171,000 for making unsolicited direct marketing calls. So let's talk about these 7 key principles of the GDPR. We don't have the time today to allow us to delve into too much detail of these key principles. So today is just an overview of what they are. But the principle should lie at the heart of your approach to processing personal data. The first one there is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So any data that you collect as a business should be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner so people know what you're going to do with it. The second one is called the purpose limitation. So that's a specific, explicit, and legitimate purposes for collecting that data. The third key principle there is called data minimization. So you're only collecting the personal data that is limited to what is absolutely necessary for your business in relation to achieving your purpose. Accuracy is the next principle there, and data under the GDPR, personal data needs to be kept accurate and up to date. And for businesses, that also means reacting to reacting to requests to rectify data wherever something is held inaccurately. Number 5, there's a storage limitation there. So your personal data should be kept for no longer than is necessary. Now, the GDPR doesn't actually give you concrete examples of what your data retention period should be. And there are different, as you'll probably know, there are different lengths of time where you can keep different batches of data. I was advising a friend a couple of years ago when GDPR first came into force and said, oh, he'd been running his business for over 30 years. And I said, so what are you going to do to comply with GDPR? And, you know, let's talk about storage limitation. Are you getting rid of the data that you no longer need? And he said, oh no, I've kept everything. And he had kept files and files of every business transaction that he'd done in 30 years. So we had to start the process of destroying huge batches of data. There wasn't a good reason to be keeping people's personal data beyond, say, a couple of years for those business transactions. So you'd be surprised how long people keep hold of data for. And these days under GDPR, there's no good reason for that. Integrity and confidentiality, that's the next key principle under GDPR. And this really talks about the security of your IT systems, your backups and your software. And the last key principle there is accountability. This is really important under GDPR. It places the onus now on companies to be accountable for the steps you've taken to demonstrate compliance. So I always say, document it. Whatever you're doing as a business, document it, even if it means just burning files, old files worth of data. Just do a quick board minute and say, this is what we've done. We've deleted old data past 6 years old, and you've got a record. So if the Information Commissioner should ever come knocking on your door, you can demonstrate your compliance. So in a nutshell, in a very brief overview, those are the 7 key principles of GDPR. So what are the challenges that businesses are facing in complying with all of these principles? Well, the reality is that we have limited time to deal with privacy compliance. External lawyers and consultants can certainly help us, but they can't fully know our business. Only we know our business and our business activities, and it's our duty to embed privacy compliance within our organisation. But no one can fully do it for you. It's a matter of the company to take in-house and tackle itself. Compliance can be difficult. Businesses need to understand their data flow. Where does the personal data come in from? What third parties is it shared with? And do we have legitimate grounds or consent for sharing that data? How long is it kept for? As I mentioned before, are our IT systems safe and secure from potential data breaches or hacking? So the solution has to be getting everyone on board with the importance of GDPR compliance. It will take privacy champions across different departments to achieve continued compliance. So build a team, choose someone from IT, sales, marketing, HR, finance, whatever departments you might have, but across a good range of departments in the company. They all play important roles in collecting personal data from different sources, deciding where to store it and how long to keep it for. A key part of this, I think Justine, you also mentioned that, is to train up new members of staff as part of their onboarding process with the importance and the meaning of GDPR and data protection compliance. Okay, so let's go to marketing specific questions. These are frequently asked questions that you can find on the ICO website. And I really do urge everybody to have a look at the ICO website, because not only the questions are on there, but you get some good answers too. So let's go through some of those. Does the GDPR apply to business marketing? Yes, absolutely. The GDPR applies wherever you're processing personal data. If you can identify an individual either directly or indirectly, the GDPR will apply, even if they're acting in a professional capacity. So, for example, if you have the name and number of a business contact on file or their email address identifies them, joe.blogs@maglabs.com, GDPR applies. Does the GDPR mean we need consent for marketing? Well, not always. Consent is one of the lawful bases for processing, but there are alternatives. In particular, your business may be able to rely on legitimate interests to justify some of your business-to-business marketing. However, sometimes you will need consent to comply with something called the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation, PECR2. So the next question asks, when can we rely on legitimate interests for marketing? So you can rely on legitimate interests for marketing activities if you can show that the way that you use people's data is proportionate, has a minimal privacy impact, and people wouldn't be surprised or likely to object to what you're doing, but only if you don't need consent under PECR. The following question you can probably all guess the answer to by this point. Does PECR still apply? Yes, you need to comply with both GDPR and PECR for your business-to-business marketing. Again, do go onto the ICO website for more detail on PECR. The EU is in the process of replacing its current e-privacy law with a new e-privacy regulation, EPR. However, it's yet to be agreed and finalised. So in the meantime, the existing PECR rules will continue to apply until the new EPR is finalised. So what are the rules on marketing emails or texts? So sole traders and some partnerships are treated as individuals, so you can only email them or text them if they've specifically consented to you doing so, or if they've bought a similar product from you in the past and didn't opt out from marketing messages when you gave them that chance. You've got to include an opt-out or an unsubscribe option in the message, and this has been commonplace across all business. Hopefully you found every email that's come into your inbox has an unsubscribe button. It's very occasionally I'll come across the odd one that doesn't have that, and it's quite a shock actually these days. Everybody should have an unsubscribe or opt-out option whenever they send an email to anyone. So you can email or text any corporate body, say info@maglabs.com. However, it's good practice and good business sense to keep a do not email or text list of any businesses that object or opt out, and screen any new marketing lists against that. So what are the rules on marketing calls? You can call any business that has specifically consented to your calls, for example, by ticking an opt-in box if they've done so. And you can make live calls to any business number that isn't registered on something called the Telephone Preference Service or the Corporate Telephone Preference Service, CTPS, but only if they haven't objected to your calls in the past and you're not making marketing claims management services. So some businesses register with the TPS and others with the CTPS, and you'll therefore need to screen against both registers as well as your own do not call list. The rules on automated calls are even stricter. It's basically become a big no-no these days to make automated calls, marketing messages to anyone. You mustn't make an automated marketing call. It's defined as a call made by an automated dialing system that plays a recorded message, unless the business has specifically consented to receive this type of call from you, something I imagine would be extremely rare. So general consent for marketing or even consent for receiving live calls is not enough. It must specifically cover automated calls. So as I said, automated calls these days, massive no-no. And you can see on those ICO fines, the big over £100,000 of fines are being dished out to companies who are still making unsolicited automated calls. Okay, so what counts as consent? Consent must be freely given. So that means giving people genuine, ongoing choice and control over how you as a business will use their personal data. It should be obvious and require a positive action to opt in. So you can't have those pre-checked opt-in boxes that they have to take a positive action to reverse. Consent requests have got to be prominent, unbundled from other terms and conditions, concise and easy to understand, and user-friendly. So you must make it easy for people to withdraw their consent at any time they choose. There are lots of really good examples of consents on websites. Check out the BBC or ITV websites, for example, for thorough, granular consent forms. So what else should we consider? You must tell people what you're doing with their information. This includes your purposes for processing the personal data, your lawful basis for processing, how long you plan to obtain it for, and who it will be shared with. And that's normally all covered in your privacy policy. So that's the best place to cover all of those requirements. And I would urge you, if you haven't updated your privacy policy since 2018, since GDPR has been enforced, and I would urge you to do that. If you are relying on consent, as I mentioned, the individual can withdraw their consent at any time, and then in that case, you must stop processing their data. Okay, but that was a quick whistle-stop tour of the GDPR main key principles and obligations. Let's talk about GDPR post-Brexit. So what happens now that the UK has left the EU? Well, we're in this transition period until the end of this year, as everybody I'm sure will know, to allow time to negotiate a new relationship with the EU. So during this transition period, GDPR still continued to apply in the UK fully. Continue to follow existing guidance on the GDPR and check out the ICO website for any new developments. So at the end of the transition period, at the end of this year, what will happen? So that does depend still on negotiations. And I'm not going to comment on how EU-UK negotiations for Brexit are going these days in the news. It's not going to be covered today. But the GDPR is an EU regulation, and in principle, it will no longer apply to the UK from the end of this year. However, if you operate inside the UK, you will need to comply with UK data protection law, which for us is now, we have a 2018 UK Data Protection Act. The government has said that it intends to incorporate the GDPR into UK data protection law from the end of the transition period. The UK Data Protection Act already does a lot of that. So in practice, there will be little change to the core data protection principles, rights and obligations found in the GDPR, all those principles that we just talked through. So the EU version of the GDPR may also still apply directly to your business if you operate in Europe, offer goods or services to individuals in Europe, or monitor the behaviour of individuals in Europe. The GDPR will still apply to any organisations in Europe who send you data, so you may need to help them decide how to transfer personal data to the UK in line with the GDPR. So just looking ahead to the 1st of January 2021, so the EU has an established mechanism to allow the unrestricted transfer, subject to GDPR compliance, of personal data to countries outside the EU. These are called adequacy decisions. And the EU has committed in a political declaration to the European Commission to begin its adequacy assessment of the UK as soon as possible after the UK leaves the EU, aiming to adopt an adequacy decision during the transition period if the applicable conditions are met. So if the EU hasn't made an adequacy decision in respect of the UK before the end of this transition period, you should act as if you want to ensure, you can continue to receive personal data from EU, EEA countries in the future. Again, there's more detailed guidance on the ICO website about UK, EU data transfers. And there's a really useful interactive tool for businesses there as well. So what will the UK data protection law be? As I mentioned, we've got the Data Protection Act 2018 now, which currently supplements and tailors the GDPR within the UK. This will continue to apply. So the provisions of the GDPR will be incorporated directly into UK law from the end of the transition period to sit alongside the DPA 2018. Do we need a European representative during the transition period? Well, quite possibly, yes. If this is a new concept for you, I would definitely recommend you looking into it. During this transition period until the end of this year, you don't need to strictly appoint a representative in the EEA. However, You may need to appoint a representative from the 1st of January 2021 if you're offering goods or services to individuals in the EEA or monitoring the behaviour of individuals in the EEA. So when it comes to appointing a European representative, you need to consider which EU or EEA state your representative will be based in and put in place an appropriate service contract for that representative to act on your behalf. So information about your representative should be provided to data subjects, add it to your privacy policy, and it should also be made easily accessible for supervisory authorities, so for example by publishing it on your website. So really that's all I have to say about GDPR post-Brexit. I'd like to just sort of leave you with some key takeaways. I hope you found it useful. If I could summarise the key messages from today's talk, these would be the four main points I'd like you to take away. One, if you're at the start of your company's journey towards becoming compliant with GDPR and UK data protection legislation, build a team of privacy champions and allow time and resources to look into your data flow and document the collecting and processing of personal data. Two, if you have an in-house legal team or external legal advisors, check in with them to what consents you need to your specific marketing activities and what steps you should be taking to achieve compliance. Three, ensure your contracts with suppliers, vendors, and any third parties contain appropriate data protection provisions. And lastly, check the ICO website, as I've mentioned quite a few times, for further guidance, checklists for your business, and updated information post-Brexit. So that's all from me on the subject. I hope you found it useful. It's been a pleasure to come and talk to you on today's webinar. I'm going to hand over to Kevin now, who will talk about his own experience of handling GDPR challenges and compliance for Maglabs.
Thank you, thank you. That's very, very comprehensive. Brilliant. When Justine kindly asked me to be involved today, my first words were, Justine, I'm not a GDPR expert. Fortunately, the expertise is being provided by the other speakers. I'll provide something slightly different and I hope useful, which is my experience of GDPR from the perspective of my work within a digital agency, and one or two tips that I've picked up along the way. I'm going to look at this more from the project management angle rather than the technical and development angle, which is a whole other subject that maybe we could return to perhaps in a future webinar. So I also have some slides, so I'm going to share my screen, and if that's worked okay, you should be seeing two otters in northern Kenya right now. Why, you may ask? Well, there's a project being run by the British Museum that is going on at the moment with researchers documenting the way of life of people around the world whose lifestyle is under threat for various reasons. And a particular researcher, who I happen to know well, works in a remote part of northern Kenya called Turkana, and he does video interviews with members of the group which show how they go about various tasks, use certain tools, and so on. So, what's this got to do with GDPR? Well, in fact, because the British Museum's base of operations is in the EU, this research work is covered by the GDPR. People who are asked to participate have data protection rights, and there are responsibilities for the researchers when handling that personal data. This slightly unusual example helped me to get a better perspective on the more familiar information which I normally deal with in websites. In a direct way, it demonstrates the basic principle of giving people rights over their data, and it also shows how access and consent need to be tailored to the people concerned. Consent in this case is a tricky thing to manage. Apart from whereas the Turkana people don't generally read. So the information is given in the form of an oral script, which we see here, we see part of. And not only that, but this project itself will see a set of follow-up trips where open conversations will be held with the communities involved, and any objections or disagreements will be taken on board. The researcher will need to make sure any dissatisfaction is resolved and that no individual or community will feel that they have been inaccurately or unfairly portrayed. So, back to the more familiar world of website forms, online registrations, etc., which suddenly seems reassuringly straightforward. Privacy by design should be embedded into our development processes in the same way we embed performance, security, and accessibility. However, on the project management side, there are a few things I have learned that make handling GDPR a whole lot easier. So we know there are different responsibilities for the data controller and the data processor. And it's the data controller that must exercise control over the processing and has data protection responsibility for it. And in the event of a data breach, which Anna has graphically described the penalties for, the data controller will be the one mainly in the sites of the ICO. As a digital agency, we tend to be data processors rather than controllers. However, there can be grey areas between those two sets of responsibilities. So to take an example, a public sector client contracts us as an agency to implement an online booking system for events on its website. The client then leaves it to us as the agency to determine what information should be collected and how that information is stored and used. In this case, the agency is processing personal data on the client's behalf, but it is also determining the information that is collected and the manner in which the processing will be carried out. This means that the agency is a data controller in its own right, even though the client retains overall control of the data in terms of commissioning the booking system. Now, if all parties are working well together to make sure that compliance issues, such as providing access or keeping personal data secure, are addressed, then the question of responsibility becomes more straightforward. Clarifying with the client where responsibilities lie and making sure the client is closely involved in the decisions on what information is collected and how it is used and processed, with the agency acting in more an advisory role and implementing those decisions will make things run more smoothly. And in this respect, it pays to establish a good relationship with the client company's data protection officer. I have found that data processors in general tend to be very clear in their thinking and like to keep things as simple as possible. They hold an important role in GDPR terms, and of course they speak with authority within the client company. In practical terms, it's a good idea to make sure the DPO is involved whenever any decisions are made, and you might actually need to persuade the client website team to do this, as there can be a tendency within organisations to avoid what they see as their own red tape. Taking another example of a practical kind of situation, a public sector client inquires about including some public-facing forms that would capture sensitive data for use in setting up referral visits and then feed that data into their internal system. So for that, if the solution could be to set up the forms within the client's internal system itself and present them on the site such that no information is being held on the site itself, then no data is collected at site level, and GDPR compliance is much simpler for us as the agency. There are still potentially things that need to be done. Before the user submits the form, they must be made aware that the form is collecting personal data with the intent to store that data. And of course, there is a responsibility to let the user know how that data will be stored and used, and how they can get it changed or deleted. So that brings me to my next point, the value of a well-written and comprehensive privacy policy. The right to access states that a user must be informed if data is being collected, the controller's name, what data is being collected, how, where, and for what purpose the data is being collected. and that is a lot of information. So this is where the privacy policy comes into its own, as a place to fully disclose the site's data collection and storage practices, and then link to from wherever we need to provide the information or request consent. Okay, that brings us to Brexit. And at the moment, of course, we're in the transition period. What happens at the end of that? As Anna has explained, the EU GDPR will no longer apply directly in the UK from 31st of December 2020. However, the UK government will form a data protection regime that will work in a UK context after Brexit, and this new regime will be known as the UK GDPR. So in practice, there will be little change to the core data protection principles, rights and obligations found in the GDPR. As there is very little material difference between the EU GDPR and the proposed UK GDPR, and if anything, the EU version is likely to be more stringent. As I understand it, and I could be wrong, but it seems to make sense to me that it will probably be best for organisations that process personal data to continue to comply with the requirements of the EU version. Of course, the EU version of the GDPR may also still apply directly if you or your clients operate in Europe, or offer goods or services to individuals in Europe, or you monitor the behaviour of individuals in Europe. Probably also worth noting that the ICO will not be the regulator for any European specific activities in the EU version of the GDPR, although presumably they will continue working closely with the European supervisory authorities. That's my contribution. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Kevin. We're happy to take questions now. You'd like to either post them in the Q&A or the chat. We're happy to, we'll try and answer the questions. And where we can't, we'll happily email you a response where we can. Usually takes a few minutes for a question or a chat to come through, so I have to wait a couple of seconds. But thanks very much, Kevin and Anna. Very, very comprehensive, and I liked your opening slide, Kevin. You made it. You made the topic into. You explained it in a new way. I think it was brilliant. Right. Have we got any questions? Give you a couple of minutes, otherwise we're going to sign off and it will be too late. You'll have to email us. Still can't see any. Oh yes, we do have one. Can you see the question? Can you see the question, Anna? Is there any difference between imagery or textual compliance? As in, is an image more or less valuable than copy?
Personally, I don't know, to be honest with you. I know that images of people, as in my first slide, are definitely covered, and I presume have equal weight with other information about that subject. But Anna might know better.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure what this question was. I couldn't picture what this question was trying to differentiate between. So we're talking about personal data. And the question is there any difference between imagery or textual compliance? No, I don't think so. In a sort of overview, nutshell, no. You're either collecting personal data that complies in a way that is compliant, it's transparent, it's got consent, or you've got legitimate grounds, or you are in breach. So there's no difference. Your compliance it's no difference whether it's an image that contains personal data or text. Sorry, I may not have understood the question properly.
That's fine. I'm not sure I totally understand either.
Sorry.
Do you see the next question? I don't know whether you want to take it, Anna.
Yeah, the question is, if we have a no-deal Brexit, will we as marketeers have to make changes to our GDPR and privacy policy and how we capture and manage client data? At the moment, there isn't any set changes that we here at Maglabs are getting ready for the end of this year. We did, across our group, make extensive changes to GDPR, to our privacy policy following GDPR. And what we find is that even though we have this UK Data Protection Law 2018 that incorporates most of it, we're still being asked by clients to comply with GDPR as well as UK legislation. So I would venture that there's no current need to change it. If we have a no-deal Brexit, if we end up at the end of December with a no-deal Brexit, there's certainly no need on the horizon for us to change our privacy policy. We're going to still make sure that all our privacy policy and legal documentation is compliant with both regimes, GDPR and the EU regime and the UK regime. Whether you want to update your privacy policy with any COVID type updates, that's a separate matter. That could be something worth looking into.
Thank you. Right, we've got about 3 minutes, so time for a last question if anyone's got one. No, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you everybody for participating, and particularly to you, Anna, and you, Kevin, for all your thoughts and the effort you put into your presentations. You will be able to download the recording of this webinar and go through Anna's presentation in detail. And if you do have any questions, then you can reach out to us at any time, and we'll be happy to get back to you where we can. Obviously, we can't offer any advice as such, but otherwise, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.